wanted to go over the hollow verbs with you. I know that this is a little bit of a trickier lesson. Some of these forms are just not what you're used to. So I figured if I walk through the lesson with you, that might help a little bit. We'll take a look at the paradigm chart at the end of the lesson that Furtado has in the back of the book. We'll just talk about why some of these changes occur. So the first thing to know really is what a hollow verb is. And a hollow verb is a verb where instead of having 3 consonantal letters in the root, a hollow verb has 2 consonantal letters and a vowel letter. So this is why we can still say that Hebrew roots have 3 letters. Sometimes hollow verbs are called biconsonantal, but that's biconsonantal, not biliteral. And so there are 3 letters, it's just one is a vowel letter. So when we see bo, we've got consonant, holem vav consonant. When we see seem, we've got consonant, hirik yod consonant. When we see kum, we've got consonant, shurik consonant. These are the 3 types of hollow verbs. Holem vav hollow verbs, hirik yod hollow verbs, and shurik hollow verbs. And there are some differences in the way each of these conjugate, but we'll talk about what those differences are. So now that we know what a hollow verb is, we want to think about what would cause this to conjugate or inflect differently than other verbs, than a strong verb. And it's this idea that you've got a vowel in here. You don't have 3 consonants, you only have 2. And that's going to cause all kinds of issues for syllabification and long versus, I guess I should say medium versus short vowels, that sort of a thing. That's really why we end up with the irregularities. It's like a one noon that assimilates. That assimilation is going to cause all kinds of spelling changes. So here, the effect that conjugation has on this middle vowel letter, that effect is going to be the reason why the hollow verbs look different than other verbs. The good news is, the form that you're given in your vocabulary, the lexical form is what we call that. This is the form you would look up in a lexicon. This is actually not the Cal Perfect 3MS form. This is the Cal Infinitive Construct form. And the reason why that's a good thing is because the perfect form of the hollow verb is actually the most unexpected form. And so if we gave you just the Cal Perfect 3MS form, you wouldn't really know what the possibilities of this verb were just by looking at the Cal Perfect form. But when you see the infinitive construct form, you can see that full middle vowel, and you can know whether it's holem vav, hirik yod, or shurik. So the infinitive construct form, like I said, you don't need to figure out anything extra. This is just the form that you're given in your vocabulary. So it's just going to be a consonant, vowel letter, consonant. The imperfect, all the imperfect does to the infinitive construct is it adds a prefix, or in some forms, a prefix and a suffix. Just like the strong imperfect. We call this the prefix conjugation because every form has a prefix, and some of those also have a suffix. Well, in the strong verb, the imperfect, in the Cal pattern, adds a yod, tav, aleph, or nun prefix letter. Same here, no difference. The only difference really, the most important difference I guess, is that in the strong verb we add a yod hirik prefix. But we can't do that to the hollow verbs, and the reason why we can't is because in an imperfect of a strong verb, when we have yod hirik, we then borrow the R1 letter, we put a silent shavah, and we use that R1 letter to close off the first syllable. But we can't do that here because if we were to close off the first syllable by putting a silent shavah after the R1 vowel, or R1 letter, then our next syllable would begin with a vowel. And Hebrew doesn't want to do that, especially in the middle of a word. Really, the only time Hebrew begins a syllable with a vowel is when you have the vav conjunction in its shurik form. But we're certainly not going to begin a syllable with a vowel in the middle of a word, okay? So, for that reason, this kof has to stay part of this final syllable. This has to stay kum. But the problem is, when we've got an open, unaccented syllable, which is what this prefix syllable would be, yakum, the accent's over here, so this syllable is not accented, and it's open because the main syllable won't let us take the kof away. What happens in that situation is Hebrew really wants to have a medium or long vowel in this syllable. All right, if this is open and unaccented, Hebrew wants a medium or long vowel here, not a short vowel. And since hirik is a short vowel, it won't work. So what happens is we get the kametz. And you can think of it however is helpful to you, but I usually think of the kametz as it's a wider vowel, it's a little bit bigger of a vowel of the vowels that we have in this medium length. It's kind of the bulkier of the vowels. And the fact that we've only got 2 consonants in our root kind of opens up room for a bulkier vowel. Whatever you need to do to remember that the prefix vowel for hollow verbs in the Cal imperfect is kametz, make whatever memory aid you need to. But that's what you need to know here. The first thing you need to know about the hollow verbs in the imperfect is that they take a kametz prefix letter, okay? So that's the first change you're going to notice in these, and you'll see that all of these have a kametz prefix. There's only one exception, and it's this long na form of the imperfect, the 3FP and the 2FP. And the only reason why this doesn't have a kametz, it did have a kametz, the problem is we added a whole nother syllable to the end, and not only that, we actually added 2, because we add in this segel yod infix. You can think of it as a connecting vowel if you want, but we've added a segel yod and a nun kametz hey. And when we do that, the accent is on this second to last syllable, this segel yod syllable. So this would be tivoena. This would be tishimena. and sorry for, I don't know why, but in my electronic version, when I have the Hiric yod, a lot of times the Hiric doesn't show up, but all of these should have a Hiric yod here. So, and then finally, tukumena. Okay, so the accent is on the segel yod syllable, but again, just think of that as like a connecting vowel. What that's going to do is that's going to make this syllable originally open, just like you see here, open, but it is now pro-pre-tonic. So the accented syllable is the tonic, the syllable before the accented syllable is the pre-tonic, and then the syllable before that is the pro-pre-tonic. And originally open pro-pre-tonic syllables always get reduced, and so that's why we go to a shava here. But when you see this form out in the wild, it's going to be pretty obvious that you've got the segel yod nun cometz hey. Whenever you see segel yod nun cometz hey, that's a pretty good indication that you've got an imperfect 3FP or 2FP of a hollow verb. All right, so other than that, the imperfect of hollow verbs is pretty regular. As long as you can remember that the prefix vowel is cometz and not Hiric, you should be good. All right, and then that other sort of secondary thing in just these two forms, which frankly these are rarer forms, 3FP and 2FP do not occur that often. They do have that segel yod infix. All right, so after we deal with the infinitive construct and the imperfect, we can now talk about the volatives. So we'll start with the imperative here. The imperative is built the same way for the hollow verbs as it is for strong verbs. The imperative is simply the second person imperfect forms, so 2ms, 2fs, 2mp, 2fp, those forms, when you remove the prefix. So it's pretty straightforward. This does mean that the imperative 2ms and the infinitive construct are going to tend to look identical, but you're used to that anyways. That tends to be the case with strong verbs as well. When you see a Hiric yod on the end of what looks like an imperative or an infinitive construct, this is actually a little bit tricky because, as we will learn in, where do we learn this? Lesson 35, more pronoun suffixes. We'll learn that you can actually put these pronoun suffixes that we've put on nouns to make them possessive. We've put them on prepositions to designate the object of the preposition. We can also put these on verbs and on infinitives. And on an infinitive, it can mark the object of the infinitive or the subject of the infinitive. So the 2FS imperative is actually going to look a lot like the infinitive construct with a 1CS suffix. But you'll see toward the end here that there are some forms of hollow verbs that are going to be identical. We've already seen a few of them. These are also identical when it comes to just strong verbs, the 3FP and 2FP of the imperfect. But you've also got the 3FS and the 2MS of the imperfect. Those are also identical. But we're used to that with our strong verbs. We're used to the 3FP and 2FP with our strong verbs. When it gets into the hollow verbs, we'll also have situations where, and this is the same with strong verbs as well. So I guess we don't even really need to bring it up at this point, but I just wanted you to be aware of it. The imperative is just the imperfect second person with the prefix removed. That's it. So it's pretty easy to recognize. Cohortative, just like with strong verbs, it's just the first person form of the imperfect with a cometz hey added. That's it. Shouldn't give you too much trouble recognizing it. You can still see the lexical form of the verb in there, cum. Just like in the imperatives, you can still see the lexical form of the verb. Now, in the 2FP, this shurik is going to move into a holum. And I think that probably has to do with the fact that this is closed and unaccented, but I could be wrong about that. So that is one little irregularity to be aware of the 2FP, but that's a pretty rare form. All right, so again, infinitive construct, easy peasy. That's the form you get in your vocabulary list. Imperfect, same as normal. You just have a cometz prefix vowel instead of a Hiric, and that's because you've only got 2 consonants in your root instead of 3. Imperative, again, it's just the imperfect second person forms with the prefixes removed. No problem. Cohortative, again, just like the strong verbs, the cal imperfect first person forms, either the aleph or the nun, with a cometz hey added. Then we get to the jussive, and the jussive is where we start to see a little bit of variation. So just like in the third hey verbs, the jussive form of hollow verbs is going to be a shortened form. And the way that the jussive shortens third hey verbs is it drops the third hey, even if there's no suffix that would normally cause it to drop. Even if it's just by itself, the jussive will cause the third hey to drop. Well, in the hollows, the hollow verbs, the jussive causes the vowel letter to drop. So we don't have a holum vav example here, but I assume it's the same as here. Kum becomes yakom. So the difference between the jussive and the imperfect in the hollow verbs is yakum is your imperfect, but that yakum, the shurik, is going to change into a holum in the jussive yakom. All right, and so yasim in the imperfect, that Hiric yod, is going to change into a sere in the jussive. It's going to tighten up the spelling. All right. So again, basically the idea is you lose that vowel letter that was there in the imperfect. That's the jussive for the hollows. Pretty straightforward. That's not that crazy. That's pretty easy to get your head around. The hard part of the hollow verbs, and the reason why we don't give you the cal perfect 3ms form as the lexical form, is because the perfect is the hardest to recognize form of the hollow verbs. Now, I guess that's probably not the right way to say it. It's not hard to recognize it. It's just this is the most marked form. This is more different from the infinitive construct than any other form. That's what I want to say, I guess. So there are basically 3 rules to keep in mind when a hollow verb goes into the perfect. The first rule to keep in mind is that, and I'll show you, we saw up here that we have these paradigm verbs, these model verbs. This is a holom vav hollow verb, this is a hirik yod hollow verb, and this is a shurik hollow verb. We've got those down here as well. Shurik hollow verb, hirik yod hollow verb, holom vav hollow verb. But then we've got 2 extras. The reason why we have these 2 extra columns here is because these are stative hollow verbs. And just like the stative perfect can have a different theme vowel, so the stative perfect, it could be either a patak, a holom, or a sere theme vowel. In the hollow verbs in the perfect, you can also have differences. So we'll focus first on the action verbs over here. All right. So the first rule to keep in mind is that hollow verbs are susceptible, just like in the jussive, they lose their middle vowel. That also happens in the perfect. So that's the first thing. The hollow perfects are susceptible to losing their middle vowel letter. And the reason why I say susceptible is because the holom vav stative verb, bosh, it does not consistently lose it. So it's not like it's 100%, but the vast majority of hollow verbs will lose their middle vowel letter in the perfect conjugation. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2 for hollow perfects is that that vowel letter will then be replaced by an A-class vowel. So you can see through all 3 of these columns, A-class kametz, A-class kametz, A-class patak, A-class patak, A-class patak. Kametz, kametz, patak, patak, patak. Kametz, 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 kametz. Kametz, 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 patak, 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 kametz, patak, 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 okay? All of these are A-class letters. That's the second rule. So first, hollow verbs in the perfect are susceptible to losing their vowel letter. Second, that vowel letter will be replaced by an A-class vowel in the perfect. And then the question may arise, how do you know whether it's going to be a kametz or a patak? Because it seems like it switches through here. Here's how you know. This doesn't apply to bob, and that's specifically, I think, because the aleph quiesces here. So that kind of causes a problem. But if this were, I wish that they would have given you a different verb here. So we'll just ignore the bo column. But for other active or action verbs that are hollow in the perfect, if you have no suffix, the letter is kametz. If you have a vocalic suffix, that is a suffix that is just a vowel, like sama or kama, then it's a kametz. Only when you have a consonantal suffix, like tav kametz, tav shaba, tav hirik yod, tav segel mem, tav segel nun, or nun shurik. Only in these situations where you have a consonantal suffix do you get the patak, okay? So that's rule number 3. The first rule is that the hollow verbs are susceptible to losing their vowel letter in the perfect. The second rule is that that vowel letter will be replaced by an A-class vowel. And the third is that that A-class vowel will be a patak when it has a consonantal suffix. All right, so that should keep you pretty well focused on the forms. Again, moot and bosh, these are statives, so they're going to be a little bit different. For moot, the third person is going to have a sere vowel. So you see that 3CP, 3MS, 3FS. Second and first person, those are going to have an A-class patak. All right, and then finally we've got the participle here. The participle is a little bit tricky because it looks very similar to the perfect until you get into the plural, where you've got the clear hirik yod mem, holom vav tav endings. But you'll notice that the masculine singular participle of a hollow verb and the feminine singular participle of a hollow verb look identical to the cal perfect 3ms and 3fs. And in fact, if we go over here to our paradigm chart, we can see that we've got the 3ms, com, in the perfect. The participle is also com. 3fs in the perfect, kama. Feminine singular is also kama. And then, of course, the imperative 2ms and the infinitive construct are also identical. But the rest of these should be pretty straightforward. The last one to look at is really simple. This is the infinitive absolute. And really the only thing you need to be aware of here is that regardless of what type of hollow verb it is, whether it's a holom vav hollow verb, a hirik yod hollow verb, or a shurik hollow verb, the infinitive absolute is going to put a holom vav in there every time. So, for example, bosh and bo are going to look identical in the infinitive construct and the infinitive absolute. But kum is going to look different in the infinitive absolute than the infinitive construct. Kum becomes comb. Seem becomes som. Moot becomes moat. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Dig into the exercises. Let me know if you have any questions about that. We'll certainly focus on those during next week's video conference, but I thought this would be helpful to walk through.